There you go, I think you're going. Yeah. Right, well,
Hello, thank you so much for making our time for this interview today. I highly appreciate your effort and your commitment. This interview is going to be private and confidential. Transcripts from this interview would be shared with other members of the group. However, your name, age, and everything else would be anonymized, so nobody would know that it is you who has answered these questions. You can stop me in the middle of the interview if you have any questions or if you have any further doubts. Today we're going to have a little chat about Brexit and how you feel about Brexit as a person in the EU. Feel free to stop me in the middle of the interview, as I said, or do you want to ask me any questions before we start?
no, I'm good to go.
Okay, how long have you lived in the UK and how has your experience been so far?
I've lived here my whole life, so 20 years, and I grew up in a very small town that's always kind of voted Conservative, so my kind of exposure to anyone who isn't white and English was incredibly minor until I came to university, at which point kind of you see all these other cultures, which is a lot more interesting, I can tell you that. But it's been all right. I've always been aware that there is a lot of kind of casual and institutionalized racism in this country, but you always kind of look at the Americas and think it's worse over there. You see it worse in other places, but I've kind of come to realise that here, post Brexit, it's always been there. That vitriol has always been here, and it's starting to come out now, which is hideous. Really, it feels incredibly regressive to me.
Okay, and what do you think about Brexit? You mentioned that, it has come out and things like that, but what is your opinions about Brexit in general?
I think Brexit, everyone says, it was about the economy, it was about this and that. No, it wasn't. It was about immigration. It was purely based on immigration, which I think is awful that we managed to have such a decisive election based on that, because it really did bring out this casual racism and bring it into the public fore. And the problem with it now is people think because we're leaving the EU and because that side won, people think it's now acceptable to act in that way. And I was reading the other day, I think hate crimes against ethnic minorities in this country have gone up something like 50% in a year, which I think is absolutely appalling. And I really do think that the politicians involved in the Leave campaign, particularly people like Nigel Farage and UKIP, really played on that immigration card as well, which I just think is absolutely abhorrent when it comes to modern politics. We should be past that by now. And in terms of political life, Brexit is going to ruin this country. So much of our economy is dependent on trade within the EU. And the fact that we're we want to keep that trade relationship with the EU. Why don't we just stay in the EU then? All of the perks and benefits that we're looking for during these Brexit talks are what we had before we left. So it's just, I could go on about this all day. It annoyed me so much. And the one thing that really got me was the fact that it wasn't a constitutionally binding referendum. And David Cameron, it was a big fancy survey of do we want to leave or not, and the fact that they won by less than 2% should have cemented in politicians' minds that this was not something to be carried on with, because there was such a huge dichotomy between people, and it was never going to end well that they pursued it. So I think David Cameron should have taken one for the team and said, right, well, this was a nice opinion survey, but we're not going to do it.
I like that you go in so much detail about the political side of Brexit, but can you tell me a little bit about what about the relationships between the members of UK and non-UK citizens? Apparently you're an EU member, so can you tell me how has Brexit influenced these relationships?
I think they've gotten a little bit awkward after Brexit. How everyone saw America after they elected Donald Trump and we're all like, God, that's embarrassing. But I think a lot of EU member countries are looking at us and thinking the same thing, because this is going to be such a detrimental arrangement that we've gotten ourselves into. And so I think kind of the relationship between Britain and then maybe neighbouring countries, France, Spain, is probably going to deteriorate a little, because the EU is going to be moving together as one body towards particular goals, humanitarian rights, all that kind of stuff, moving towards one economy, whereas Britain's kind of going to have to be finding its feet all over again outside of that community. And I mean, I know people on my course from all over the place, and I get on like really well with them on a personal level. But I do think on a kind of political, social level, that relationship that we have with other countries is going to get more difficult. And I think it's made more difficult by how vocal some of the Leave people are and how vocal they are in their opposition to France and Germany. And you've seen all these attacks, particularly on like Angela Merkel, and it's so, I've said before, it's so regressive. It feels like we're stepping into the relationship that we had probably just post World War II, when everyone was kind of, well, when Britain was trying to cut itself off a little bit to rebuild. But we don't need to be doing that now, and I think it is going to have a long-lasting impact on our ability to have good diplomatic talks, make good diplomatic arrangements with other EU member countries. Yeah.
It's interesting. And what do you think about discrimination in general, and what, according to you, comprises discrimination?
I think discrimination is treating someone in any way differently based on what you see before you or what you hear before you. And I mean, that's a good question actually. But we are seeing so much more of it now, because people see anyone who doesn't appear to be white, British, like born and raised in this country, as an other, which I think is appalling, because this country is built on multicultural values. Like I was saying, when we were like rebuilding Britain after World War II, the majority of that work was done by people immigrating into this country afterwards. And Britain has always been, or supposed to be, like this pearl of the empire where people can come and make new life for themselves. And now it's just anyone who isn't what you would expect, looking at the demographic of maybe a small, town in the southwest, like where I'm from. Anyone who doesn't fit into that mould is being treated differently. And then, but I think it's definitely systemic, because racism isn't a natural phenomenon. I think people are taught to be racist. It's kind of like indoctrinated into you by your environment. And so it does make me worry that in the future, all this work that we've done to kind of tackle racism is going to be for nothing, because Leavers, their families, they're going to pass this on. And like this whole kind of, like I was saying, the abuse that's risen, like hate crime, I've got a horrible feeling that's going to like continue the further that we get from the EU, because we're ditching a lot of their humanitarian laws and a lot of their like Theresa May wanted to get rid of what was it, the 1997 Human Rights Act. She wanted to scrap it. What are you doing? Stop that. That's important. But yeah, I do think people, like, speaking as someone who has never been on the receiving end of it, I can't even imagine what it's like to go through that. But I am aware that it is there, and I find that disgusting, really. Especially it's 2018, or nearly 2018. Like, people get a grip.
Okay, and can you give me an example of what you or others may consider discrimination? Something that's from your own life, or something from what you hear from your friends, your course mates, or something that you read in the media, maybe.
Well, I work in the supermarket in my town, and like I was saying, it's basically Whitey McWhiteville where I come from, and about 2 years ago, this Muslim family moved into the town, and they're lovely. They come into the shop every Saturday, so I know them quite well now. But I remember one of the first times they came into the family, 'cause the mother wears, is it a niqab that covers the whole face?
Yeah.
And so she was wearing that in the store, and they were just going around doing their shopping. And my supervisor at the time had to ask someone to leave because they were making comments at her, like, of a racial nature, and like saying, I can't recall specifically, but I remember being stood there and thinking, oh my god. So I went and got my supervisor and said, you need to get rid of him because he's being really racist towards this woman. And I'd never seen it like in front of my own eyes before. Like, obviously you turn on the news and it's everywhere, but I'd never seen, and it struck me because there was just no need for it. She was just trying to do her shopping, and this guy was just making really loud comments and then like laughing, and like you could see people around him in two minds whether or not to be like complicit and just laugh along with him, or kind of giving each other the side eye a little bit. So, but yeah, that's something that I've never really had anything else like that, to be honest. But I think that is because there is such a lack of diversity, ethnic diversity where I'm from, that I haven't really seen it. Because obviously you don't, well, I imagine you do, but you don't really get that kind of problem at the uni because it is such an open space, and like people are a lot more liberally and common sense minded around here. Like people treat each other decently. But yeah, that's something that I know, that I've seen firsthand.
It's interesting that you mentioned uni, but have you seen any experience of discrimination at the uni anyway? Somebody being discriminated against, or just a story that you must have heard from your course mates?
I gotta admit, I haven't so far. Like, one of my closest friends on my course is from Bahrain, and but I've never really heard anything from him, actually. I think, I'm trying to think if there has been anything, but I know some of the French people on my course get a lot of stick. Like one of the guys I used to live with last year, people used to like make comments about him being like a frog or something like that. I can't remember what the stereotype for French people is, and I remember he used to get a bit pissy about it, which fair enough. But in terms of like actual racial incidents, I don't think I've actually heard anything, which is quite nice really when you think about it, but I'm sure they are happening. Like, it's impossible that you could have this many people together without that coming out somewhere. But I think luckily I haven't encountered any of that yet.
And how do you think Brexit has impacted the university culture in general?
I think it's made people a lot more conscious of the way that they act, because like you're seeing in the media these reports of increased violence based on ethnicity and stuff like that, and I think people are taking more care to be like good to each other, because I think you will find probably 90% of this university voted to remain, because everyone says that universities are like liberal hotbeds. I think universities teach you how to think for yourself, and they teach you that common sense regard towards politics, and that is why so many people are liberals, because conservatism doesn't make any sense on a base level. But so I do think people are really kind of looking out for each other more, taking care of each other more, and maybe banding around people who might be, at risk off of campus and outside of the university.
Yeah, but you mentioned that you've lived in UK all your life, but you are from the EU origin. Do you think that has something to do with discrimination that you have faced, or is there something about the EU identity, or is it something about British identity in general that affects discrimination, or how do you perceive, how do identity shape discrimination according to you?
I think the problem that Britain has always had is, whilst it's always been a member of the EU, I don't think you could have gone up to anyone over the past 40 years and said, do you feel European? And they would have said yes. I do think people have always retained that sense of being British first before being anything else. And I think that was important during the election, because whilst people saw the validity of voting Remain and staying within the EU, recognised it was a decent institution, it was trying to, make this society better, people struggled to identify with it on the same level that Leave people identified with being British, because there is no European identity in Britain. Like, I love the EU, I think it's a really good trade organisation, humanitarian grounds are very important, and it's got its faults, but it's doing its best. But I have never felt European. Like, I've always felt British first, and I think that was definitely an issue, because that made the Leave vote more compelling on a kind of baser, instinctual level, and so it was more difficult, I think, for people who were undecided to thereby lean towards voting Remain instead.
Yeah.
But identity, yeah, is definitely one of the cornerstones of any kind of political decision that you're going to make. It really massively impacts on how you view the party. Like, that's why Labour, whilst imperfect in its current form, it's why the majority of ethnic voters go towards Labour, because the Conservatives are traditionally a white, upper class, kind of posh boy party, whereas Labour have got these more intrinsic social values. They're moving more towards multiculturalism and diversity in society. So I think, identity massively forms a part of your partisan behaviour, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Do you want to add to the chat that we just had right now? In
No,
any
it's
way?
very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for making our time for today's chat. And I'll provide you the spot details if you need to discuss anything further with my lecturers or me in the future. And I hope it wasn't too time constraining for you,
No,
and you
it's
had
absolutely
fun.
fine.
Thank you so much.
No worries. I hope that was useful for you.
Yeah.
Audio route. Speaker. Waveform. 16. 13. New recording 2. Trim. Dimmed. 28/11/. Controls view play.
Please
Trim. New recording.
pause.
16. Waveform. Audio route. Record. Heading. Record. Heading. Wave. New recording. Trim. 28/11. Controls view play. Pause recording. Button.